episode number 2, which is all about the research process. Now, just before we kind of go into the overview of our episode today, I did want to introduce everyone a part of this presentation. So I'm going to make my video live briefly. Hopefully you can hear me. Aloha everyone, my name is Natalie Perez and I'm our online services specialist here at the RaW Center. I'm going to transition my video camera over to Karina and she'll introduce herself.
Can you hear me, everyone? Hi, my name is Karina and I'm one of the librarians here on campus. I'm excited to work with you today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca. I'm the Learning and Success Assistant here at the RaW Center.
Okay, hi, I'm Robin and I'm the tutor coordinator.
All right, awesome. So now that you know a little bit more about ourselves, we are going to jump into this episode. In particular, this episode is all about the research process. So we're going to learn about the different types of sources. We're also going to practice evaluating sources. Then we're going to move on to strengthening your searching skills. And lastly, we're going to end on gaining note-taking strategies. So let's get started.
Okay, so we wanted to start off by talking about how research is a process. And we have this great image that kind of shows how when you're conducting research, you might feel like you have so much information and you're kind of, hopefully you don't feel like you're drowning in sources or drowning in information. Hopefully you feel like you're swimming or surfing in information. So, you know, just to keep in mind that there is a lot of information in there. It does take time to kind of sift through all the information. Of course, you have to have time to read your sources. You got to think about all the different stages, right? So besides having time for finding sources and reading, of course, you want to leave yourself enough time for the writing. And then you might be circling back as well. It's not like you finish finding sources and you're completely done. You might start reading and then find that you need to go back and find some more. You might start writing and find that you need to go back and read some more or find another source. So kind of keeping in mind that, okay, wait, how do I get to the next screen? Okay, thanks. So just to keep in mind that, you know, just like this path over here, the research process is not a straight line. It goes in all different directions. So you might be circling back as you're going through your process. But we have these positive messages here, like don't give up and ask for help if you need it. So of course, we'll be talking about some of the resources that you can go to for help in this process. Okay, let me jump to my next slide here. Okay, so we're going to talk about the different types of sources. So we're going to talk about books and ebooks, scholarly articles, and websites. So first of all, we want to talk about books and ebooks. So with all of these different types of sources, of course, they each have their strengths and their weaknesses. And thinking about, you know, what are those strengths and weaknesses and making smart decisions about what types of sources you need, what types of sources are going to be best for your situation. You know, knowing the strengths and weaknesses of different types of sources are going to be helpful with that. So of course, with books or ebooks, and ebooks are just like regular books, except that they're electronic instead of paper. You're going to get a very in-depth analysis, right? We all know books are pretty long. So that length allows these sources to really go into in-depth and talk about subjects in a really in-depth manner. Going along with that, of course, length also means it's comprehensive, it's going to give you a lot of information, and it's extensively researched. So there's a lot of work, a lot of research that goes into putting these books together. Something that can be helpful is, since books are usually going to be divided up into chapters, you know, that can kind of tell you like, oh, maybe I just need to focus on this chapter if this is related to the subject that I'm focusing on in my research. Some of the weaknesses that can come with books or ebooks. since the publishing process can take a while, especially when you're putting together a whole book, the information might be a little older. It's going to take at least a few years for a book to be published. So you're not always going to have the most up-to-date information. And then, of course, since it is long, it takes time to read. It takes time to comprehend. So keeping those things in mind, sometimes scholarly articles can be better because they're shorter, right? So they're focused on a specific topic. So if that specific topic that the article is focused on happens to be what you're researching, and all that information is, really specific on what you're researching, then this article is going to be a great source for you. Of course, scholarly articles are usually peer-reviewed. So that means it's not just, some author decides, hey, I want to publish this, but it goes through a panel, right? So usually at least 2 or 3 other people in their field, other experts in their field, are going to read and review this article and say, yes, I believe this is important enough to be published. This is a quality study that should be published. So it's, there's kind of a team that approves it to be published, a team of experts in that field. And then scholarly articles usually highlight original research. So it's going to be very specialized information that you can't find in other places. Some of the difficult things about scholarly articles, I think the biggest thing is that they can be kind of dense or difficult to read. They might use the specialized language of that field. So say if it's a sociologist who's writing the article, he's writing for other sociologists. So he's going to use words that only other sociologists use. But I think this is why your professors might be asking you to use scholarly articles as well, because, if you're a sociology major, they want you to get into the language of the field and begin to understand the language of the field. So it can be challenging, but, especially if it's in your major, that's the direction that you probably want to be going in.
Okay, so the next source that we're talking about are websites. Websites, you must take a note of caution. So basically, when you're doing college essays or any writing for college, it is expected that you do use, books and scholarly journal articles. But there are some circumstances where websites might be suitable, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in terms of strengths, well, of course, websites are easily accessible. If you know how to use a search engine and have an internet browser, then you're able to access many websites. And one of the benefits of having a website or going to a website is to access recent information. And this includes trending issues, or if you're looking up recent statistical data, that is one of the reasons why you might want to use a website for information. And there's lots of options of websites. There's different kinds of websites that you might come across, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. Some of the weaknesses of websites is definitely the potential bias that comes with them. Certain websites are trying to sell you something, trying to highlight something in a very positive way. So you have to really be careful and look closely at these sites. That's why they require extra evaluation. And the format of the presented information might also give away whether or not a website is more credible than others, just because if there's like typos or grammatical errors, or if they're using text speak, those are kind of the sites you want to stray away from. Okay, so the next slide, we're going to go over the different kinds of websites and what they mean. Okay, so the different website domains. The first one is .com. We associate the internet with .com. And as you can see to the right where it says commercial site, there's like a little meh face, but there's like, it's okay. So usually with commercial sites, that's what .com stands for. It means the information is provided by commercial interests. So like when you're going to CNN.com or KHON.com, they are going to be shedding certain issues or certain products in a very positive light. It doesn't necessarily mean that the information is incorrect or false. It's just you're not getting the full picture of what they're trying to talk to you about or what they're trying to sell you. So you might want to take precaution when you're taking information from that site, or if you're gathering opinions from a certain site. The next site is .edu, which is a website that belongs to an educational institution. So that one is fairly good, especially if you're looking at information from a research institution from that school. It can be generally taken as credible. However, there are student organizations or other organizations on campus who are allowed to make .edu websites, and they're not usually monitored by the campus. So you might want to also be careful when you're taking information from those sites. The third site is .gov, and that one has like the big OK sign. So what that means is you're looking at a federal government site, and all branches of the United States government use this domain. So you might want to use this information for like census statistics, congressional hearings, and Supreme Court rulings. So you might want to get like your statistics there. The next site is .org, which is a site that's created by an organization. So that one also has like the meh and the OK sign as well, just like the .com. So usually organizations are generally credible, like if you got information from American Red Cross or PBS or NPR. However, there are some organizations that do have agendas or that are very one-sided, and some examples can include the National Right to Life Committee, which is a pro-life organization, or Planned Parenthood, which is a pro-choice organization. So you want to be careful, again, like whenever you're looking through all these sites, just to see where they're coming from. Are they giving you the whole picture? And then the last site is .net. So this is the catch-all website. I've seen a couple of these before in papers, and usually this is where all the sites that don't fit into these other categories go. And you might want to be careful, like especially with .nets, because pretty much anyone can make a .net, and if at all, don't use a .net for any of your sources. I recommend the first four, and then the last one, if at all, do not use a .net. Be wary of that.
Okay, great. So next we're gonna jump to our CRAP test, which is a really great resource for evaluating our sources, right? So Becca talked about how when we're looking at websites, we have to be kind of careful, not knowing what kind of, what is the quality of the information that's presented on different websites. So the CRAP test is great, not just for websites, but also for any kind of source that you might be using. And it has this really handy acronym that's really easy to remember. So CRAP stands for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. And we'll go through all of these in a little bit more detail so you can kind of see, how might we use this to, how might we use these different things to evaluate our sources. So the first one is currency, and this is basically thinking about how current do your sources need to be. And this is gonna vary, sometimes your professor is gonna give you a requirement. They're gonna say, okay, all your sources have to be, from this certain year or more recent. But other times it's gonna be a little bit more open. And so you need to ask yourself, depending on your topic, what do you think makes sense? So some examples I can give are, so, if we're looking at something like views on gay marriage, I think views have changed a lot, even in the past 10 years, right? So we would probably want to use the most current information that we could find. On the other hand, if we're looking at a more historical topic, maybe something like trench warfare in World War I, I don't know that, there's been a lot of new discoveries in trench warfare in World War I, so maybe it might not matter if our sources are 20 years old. Or even older. So it's all gonna depend on your topic. You also wanna look at relevance. So some questions that you might wanna ask yourself in relation to relevance are, is the information relevant to your topic and focus? And so I think you do wanna, you don't wanna be too broad here. So for example, if you're researching something related to teen pregnancy, you're gonna find tons of sources there, but you want sources that are specifically related to your specific research question. So maybe if it's like teen pregnancy and religious background or something like that. So, really using your research question to kind of narrow and make sure your sources are relevant to what you're trying to find out. Relevance also has to do with looking at the appropriate level. So when you're doing college work, you probably don't want to be using the same type of sources that you might have been using in high school or intermediate school. And then at the same time, if the source is too advanced where you can't understand it, that's not going to be really helpful too. So kind of looking, trying to find that sweet spot that's going to be appropriate for, is it a 100 level class or a 400 level class or wherever you're at. And then with relevance, you can also look at, is there information or quotes you can use in your paper, right? So as you're reading through, if you're thinking, oh, that's a great quote, that's exactly what I need to include in this paper, or a great piece of information. And the more of that you can find, of course, the more relevant the source is going to be for your topic as well. The first A stands for authority. So this has to do with looking at the source of the information. So who is the author, or who is the publisher, or who is the source? So if it's an author, if it's an individual, right, are they using their real name or are they using a fake name? Of course, if they're attaching their real name to this information, that's gonna give the source more credibility. If it's an organization, right, you might think of, well, what is this organization? Is it something I've heard of, like the American Cancer Society? Or maybe I need to Google a little bit and find out more about who this organization is. If we're looking at an individual author, we want to look at their credentials, right? So their credentials might come in a couple of different ways. It could be formal training, like, they have a degree in economics from Harvard or whatever. Or it could be other qualifications. Maybe they experienced something and they're writing about their experience. So there are different ways that that authors can be qualified to speak on a certain subject, but we definitely want to look at what their qualifications are. And then we can look at, is the publisher reputable as well? So some things to look at there might be, is it a university press, or just kind of Googling the press to find out, who is this publishing company? What is their criteria? Have I heard of them before? Those are some of the things we want to look at with authority. The second A stands for accuracy. So we want to look at, is the information in this article supported by evidence? So is the author, what kind of evidence does the author provide for whatever assertions that they're making? Has the text been reviewed by others? So that goes back to peer review as well. Is there an editor that looked at it? Are there other scholars who reviewed it? You can look at whether you can verify the information. So especially if one of your sources is saying something that sounds pretty outrageous, right? It might be a good idea to see, are there other sources that also say the same thing? That might be that might give you some kind of sense of how accurate the information provided in the source is. You can look at whether the author cites other experts. So we all hopefully know how to look for that list of citations at the end or at the bottom of the page. And then we can also look for spelling or grammatical errors or typos. So, one or two might not be a big deal. But if we're reading something that has a lot of spelling or grammar errors or typos, then that's another sign that maybe the person didn't put too much time, into their research as well as their writing. Okay, and then that takes us to P, which is the purpose. So asking ourselves, what is the purpose of this text? So when the author wrote this or whatever, were they trying to educate? Were they trying to inform? Are they trying to sell something? Are they trying to persuade you to think something or do something? Are they trying to entertain? And so, of course, if they're trying to sell something, if they're trying to entertain, those might not be as credible sources. And, those questions are kind of just to think about, how objective or how biased this text is. Kind of keep that in mind. So I know those are a lot of questions. So I really like this test. And I'm going to pull the link up right here. So I really like this test because it kind of gives you like a way to score your sources that you're finding. So if you feel kind of overwhelmed by all those questions and thinking like, I don't know, then this kind of makes it a little bit simpler. Okay, let's see if I can scroll here. Okay. Okay, I can scroll a little bit. So just for each category, right, it asks you a few questions. So let's try this out. Okay, I'm gonna jump back to my slides for a second. And if we imagine that, say our research question is what helps students succeed in online classes, then our keywords might be online classes and student success. So let me jump to not that one. Let me jump to our library website. And I'm just gonna put my keywords in right here and just pull up an article, and let's see. So let's just pull the first one. Okay. So if we are using this, right? So the first question asks us to kind of assess for ourselves how recent our information has to be for our topic. And I'm thinking, since I'm looking at online classes, I think that needs to be pretty recent. I think, what year is this? 2018. I think, you know, maybe 5 or 10 years old is where I want to be. And this article is from 2013, okay? So I get my 6 points there. It meets my criteria. I'm going to skip relevance for now because that one's going to take a little bit more time, but we can also look at authority, right? So if I want to evaluate the authority of this source, I can look at who is the author, right? Is it a real person? Is it an organization? Is it a username or a pseudonym? So here we have real names, right? We have somebody's real name here. So I get 3 points for that. Okay, and then it's also asking me, is the author, you know, what are their qualifications? They're qualified, they have formal training. So sometimes when you scroll through an article, you can find information about the author. Or if you can't find it within the article itself, then luckily we can Google them and see if we can find information that way. So I think I'm just gonna stop there, but let me jump back into my slides here. Okay, so I'm gonna have you folks practice, okay? So if you have your own research project.
Hi, everyone. So now we are going to be talking about search tips, just tips that will streamline the process when you're in databases and typing search queries. And if you've received library instruction before, this may not be new to you, but let's consider it a refresher. We'll breeze through this and hopefully you will learn or remember something old. If you have questions at any point during this portion, please feel free to drop it in the chat box and I can address those immediately. So with search tips, we're going to start with keywords and synonyms. So once you have your research question, you want to look at it and identify the key words or concepts in that question. You don't want to type the entire question into the search bar. So for this scenario, my research question is, how does police brutality impact youth? I'm pulling 3 key concepts: police brutality, impact, and youth. Once I have those key concepts, I then want to think of synonyms. Now, this is very important because people describe things differently. So while I may be talking about youth, Becca may be writing about adolescents or minors. And so by thinking of synonyms, just the different ways that people describe things, I'm casting a wider net, but still retrieving relevant and useful results. So for this scenario, another way of saying impact might be affect or effect or influence. I could give specific examples of police brutality, like racial profiling, or describe it another way, like police crackdown. So if there are no questions about keywords and synonyms, we will move on to our next slide. Now, the next tip I have for you is to use phrase searching to your advantage. Phrase searching is when you search for phrases instead of individual words. To search for phrases, you just want to lock the word order into place with quotations. And this is a trick that even works on Google. Now, in the databases, and this may be difficult for you to see, but I'm searching for pulmonary heart disease. In the example to the left, I am not using phrase searching, and I retrieve about 1,100 results. And looking at the results, I can see that it's not quite what I'm looking for. I'm looking at congenital heart disease, pulmonary hypertension, so not quite pulmonary heart disease. In the example to the right, though, where I do use phrase searching, I get significantly fewer results. So I'm looking at about 180 results, but just looking at the title, I can see that they are specifically about pulmonary heart disease. So it's a very precise search, and it means that you don't have to look through 1,100 results for, a good thing. So let's move on to our next tip, which is all about truncation. Truncation is nifty because it allows you to search for variant word endings. So to truncate a word, you just want to find like the first part of it and then add an asterisk to the end. So in this example, I'm truncating child, and instead of having to type out all those red words, child, child's, children, the search engine will automatically do that for me. So with child, if I'm truncating it, enter it into the search or the chat box. But what other results might I see? Anyone? Great, Shyla. Even childish, right? Child care, great, Kimberly. It seems like you guys really have the hang of it. Kids would not necessarily pop up, it might, but with truncation, you have to make sure that the first part of the word is there. And so kids will actually come in handy because we've identified synonyms, right? And so you can put in kids or child and truncate the child. Is that clear? And the next tips, a little ways down the line, will sort of illustrate that a little better. But moving on to our last tip, it's just to use Boolean operators. There are 3 Boolean operators, and or not. I am not going to focus on not just because I rarely use it and I don't think that you'd find it useful. But and or are really what you should be focusing on. And narrows your search scope. And so it's kind of telling the database that both of the terms need to be present in the results. And so you're going to get fewer, more focused results. Or it does the opposite. So you're going to get more results, and it may be a lot to sift through. It's telling the database, essentially, that either of the terms or both of the terms need to be present in the results. And so the next slide that I have for you will sort of synthesize everything that we just talked about. So going back to our original research question, how does police brutality impact youth? My 3 main concepts are on their own line, and they're connected by and. All of the synonyms for those concepts are connected by or, and then I've thrown in some asterisk or some truncation and some phrase searching as well. And so with that question about child and kids, that's something that is very good. And so we would connect that by or, because there's synonyms, different ways of saying pretty much the same thing. So if there are no questions about the tips, I hope that it's presented some new skills to you that you will use. A lot of those tips do work in Google, and it really just kind of empowers you as a searcher, makes you waste less time. So let's do this together. Our new research question is, what impact does social media have on college students' civic engagement? In the chat box, tell me what the keywords or concepts are. You're welcome, Derek. Definitely, social media, impact, social media, what else? And civic engagement, perfect. So what is another way that I might say impact? I'm thinking of synonyms for impact. And if you're not sure, a thesaurus is definitely the place to check. You can even just type in Google synonym impact, affect, effect, influence. Great. What other ways could I describe social media? Yeah, consequences is great. Mass media, I could maybe give specific examples of social media. Social networking is great. Facebook, yep. Instagram, Twitter, yeah. So it looks like you guys have this down. Let us move on to truncation. So if I truncated adapt, what would I see in the result list besides adapt? Adaptation, perfect. Adaptable, yep, the plural, adapts. Adapting, perfect. You guys really have truncation down. And so again, what I really like about this is that I don't have to type out all those different words. By adding the asterisk, the database does the work for me. Okay, so that's all I have for you regarding the tips. We are now about to divide and conquer. We're each going to okay, so starting here, if I go to the raw process tab and use either 3 or 4, that will point me in the direction of useful databases for books or ebooks or scholarly articles. So the first database that we're exploring is OneSearch. And so to access OneSearch, I would go to the third option. Now here is some useful information about books, what it is, some examples, and when you should use it in your scholarly works. To access OneSearch, I'm going to scroll down a little bit and then click on OneSearch, and I'm going to open it in a new tab. Does this look familiar to anyone? Now, OneSearch allows you to search for books, ebooks, DVDs, streaming videos, VHS, journal articles. It's kind of a one-stop shop for everything offered in the databases. That being said, it presents a lot of information. So it can be a lot to stomach, a lot to look at. And so let's take a look at what it does. So I'm looking for a 2015 book by Robert Schuster. So I'm just going to search for the author and see what pops up. And it looks like I cannot use free searching with authors. But he has 58 records in here. Now I see a 1995 book that he wrote. I'm not interested in that. I want to find more recent information. So I am going to go to the second result. And I can see that it is available at Hilo and nowhere else in the system. What I want to point out here is that you as a student have access to most of the materials within the system. So if you wanted this book and no other campus on island had it, you could request that Hilo send it to you to pick up. And to do that, you would just sign in. And it'll push you back to the same page. And now I'll be able to see the option to place a hold. I'm not going to do that right now. But think about what that means, all the content that you have access to. Now let's go back to the main page. And I am going to look for DVDs and videos about police brutality. 46,000 results. I want to refine that. I don't want to see articles. I don't want to see newspaper articles or books or reference entries. So to do that, I'm going to look to the left of the page. And this is where you can refine your results. Now, because I'm looking for DVDs, I'm going to go to the More Options tab. And here I'll see 2 columns, one to include, the second to exclude. Because I'm looking for DVDs and videos, I'm going to look, I see streaming videos. I might be interested in audio, visual, video, DVDs, VHS. And then when I hit continue, everything else is excluded from the search. So now I'm only looking at 83 results. So use this section to your advantage. Now, the last thing that I wanted to show you is how to limit to peer-reviewed articles. So I'm looking for peer-reviewed articles about police brutality and race. 14,000 results, and I see a lot of books. If I click on peer-reviewed journals, it'll limit the results to only peer-reviewed journals. I can then see that there are reference entries, reviews in those journals, but I only want to include articles. And so now everything that I am looking at is a peer-reviewed article. And to view it, I would just click on View Online. And if it doesn't show here, click on Open Source in a new window. We're lucky it's showing now. But I would click on one of the links, and it should open up for me if it's behaving. And from here, I'd be able to download it, which is always very important. This Actions tab to the right of the item allows you to generate a citation, to bookmark the permalink. So it would create a permalink for you that you would then be able to copy and paste elsewhere if you wanted to send it in an email or whatnot. And one thing that I do want to mention with computer-generated citations is that it is always important to double check it for accuracy. So it's great as a starting point, but make sure that everything that they did is accurate. So, any questions about OneSearch? What did you guys think? If there are no questions, let's move on to eBook Central. Awesome. OneSearch is pretty cool. So eBook Central can also be found on the RaW guide, the third step in the RaW process. And in eBook Central, as you may have guessed, you will find a bunch of ebooks. So it looks like this, and let's say I'm an education student and I'm looking for books about learning theory in kindergarten. Lots of books, as you can see. On the left-hand side, again, I have the option to refine my results. And so if I only wanted to look at books in the last 3 years, I could click on any of those. You can also refine by subject and language, which is also very useful. So because I'm studying education, I'm going to click on that. And so that reduced the amount of books that I'm looking at, right? And let's say that I'm interested in this first one. This is the item record. So it gives you a brief description, shows you sort of the table of contents, what you can expect in the book. If I think it's worthwhile, I can choose to read it online. And I can see the cover. I can scroll down, or I can click on the arrows right over here, and that will take me to the different pages. If you know the page that you want to go to, you can enter it here. Lots of useful tools appear. You can choose to download a chapter. And if it prompts you to create an account, it is something that you can do easily, probably in 30 seconds, and it's free. And creating an account allows you to annotate the book. So you can highlight, you can add notes, you can bookmark pages, and all of those annotations will then be found here in the sidebar, and you can easily locate which page you bookmarked or what note you made on a certain page. Another really cool feature that I want to highlight is that you can search within the text. So if you wanted to see where read was mentioned, you can type it in, and I can see that it was mentioned 8 times, and you want to look for the purple bar. So if there is purple in the bar, you know that it is more frequently used in that section. So I can see that it was mentioned a few times in chapter 3, and if I click on that, and then the page, it'll take me directly to it, and you'll notice on the screen that it highlights on the page where read is. So eBook Central is pretty awesome. What do you guys think about that? Tracy, awesome. Bye, Eli. Good luck with your research. Hope to see you next time. So moving on, let us now explore Academic Search Complete, which may look familiar to some of you. So on the RaW process tab on our RaW guide, it would be located under the number 4, so find scholarly articles. Again, a short overview of what articles are, when you should use them. You'll notice an A to Z database list here. So if you know that you want to access eBook Central, you can scroll, it's alphabetical, and I'm gonna look for eBook Central right there. Now let's take a look at Academic Search Complete. Does this look familiar to anyone? It's a very familiar interface. EBSCO is one of the premier, I guess, hosts for databases. So I'm only on Academic Search Complete right now, but if I wanted to search through multiple databases, I could expand that by clicking on Choose Databases. And so you'll notice a lot of options. If you're not sure what that database specializes in, you can hover over the yellow bubble to the right of its name, and it gives you a brief description. So for the purposes of this exercise, let's just stick to Academic Search Complete. And I'm gonna look for results about police brutality. And you'll notice that when I start typing, it starts to think for me. It tries to, figure out how I would finish that thought. If I add an or, it immediately pulls up synonyms. So it kind of does what we talked about earlier. It does the work for you. And so let's choose that one. And we're looking specifically at how it impacts youth. And so again, I'm going to choose the option where it started pulling up synonyms. On this page, you can choose to limit to full text and peer reviewed, and to limit by publication year. So let's say I just wanted to see what was available from 2013 to 2018. Now, if you forget to do that on this page, fear not, because you can always do it on this page. So again, you can refine your results over here. So full text and peer reviewed and by publication date. Now I noticed that there were some non-English results. So I'm gonna get rid of that by limiting to just English language. And let's say that I am interested in this one. You'll notice on the left that you can choose to download the PDF. Some subject terms which are controlled vocabulary. So if this is a good article, you can always click on it and it will take you to other articles about that same topic. On the right-hand side, we have some useful tools. Again, a permalink, which has the proxy. So if you're off campus, it will prompt you to enter your UH username and password. And my favorite tool here is the email tool. And so if I were to email this to myself, I would just enter my email address. I would include the PDF and whatever citation format I was using. So let's say I am using APA. And so in that email, I will get the PDF, the citation, which I would then double check, and a link back to this record. And so everything's stored in one central place, which I love. So pretty awesome. What did you guys think about Academic Search Complete? Very cool. So moving on to our last database, just to give you a quick glimpse into it, we're going to look at JSTOR, which again is on that same Find Scholarly Articles tab. And so JSTOR looks a little different, but let's say I'm looking at Indigenous groups and climate change. In JSTOR, I can find ebooks and journal articles. And so if you wanted to limit to one or the other, you could do so here. You could also limit by publication date and subject, kind of like, I think, eBook Central. So I'm just interested in what books are available. One thing to note about JSTOR is that you do have to click on Update Results. So unlike EBSCO, if you click on something, it doesn't automatically update. So make sure that you update the results. You actually hit that button. If I click on show snippets right above the results, it will give me a little overview. And so it'll try to find the words that I searched for in the text and just give me a little taste of what that particular book or article is talking about. And if I click on it, I can choose to download it or cite it. And if I scroll down a little bit, I can even start reading it. And so my search terms I can see occurred 162 times in this item. Pretty cool. Now, one thing that I do want to mention about JSTOR that you may have noticed is that there was no option to click on a peer-reviewed journal, right? And so you can limit to journals, but you don't know that they are peer-reviewed. So you would want to, and I'm going to change it back to journals. You would want to make sure that if you're looking at an item, to click on journal info. Okay, gives you a little more information. It might say whether it's peer reviewed or not. But if not, you would then want to actually look up the journal itself to make sure that it abides by the peer review process. So a little extra work, but not that hard to find out. So any questions about JSTOR? It pulls from like a different collection kind of. So it's just really a matter of preference, which database you prefer using. You can get book chapters in JSTOR and journal articles. And so if you're more comfortable with that, I would definitely recommend you start there. If you're not finding a lot of stuff, try some other database. What was your favorite? Add it into the chat. Which database did you find to be most useful and easy to use? EBSCO? I agree. And so guys, I do want to mention here that this research guide kind of talks about everything that we've been talking about in this workshop series. It has a lot of information about information. Kind of funny, right? So the difference between print and online, how to identify primary or secondary sources, what you should be using in academia, and then the process. So how to identify your topic, how to search for things, how to evaluate them, and how to write. And the last thing that I want to mention before I transition the presentation over to Becca is that to access the databases from the library's website, it's going to look different very soon, this website. But right now, you would just click on the research tab, and then you would scroll down to research databases. And it will present you with an A to Z list of all the databases that are offered by UH West Oahu. And so 199, I can choose to either scroll down, or if I know the database that I'm looking for, I can click on the first letter. So if I'm looking for eBook Central, I would click on E, and then it would be right there. That's all I have for you guys. I hope you guys feel a little more confident diving into the databases and searching for things. So good luck. Becca is now going to talk to you about how to take notes.
Okay, guys, I'm gonna make this really quick. I know we said 15 more minutes, but we'll be pretty quick. So then the main thing to take away from this is if you find a potential source, please download it and cite it, because it's much easier to just delete the source when you realize you don't need it versus, oh, I think I'm gonna use it later, and then realize you can't find it again. Of course, highlight and annotate. So use your colors, take notes alongside of the source that you're reading so that you're aware of like what you agreed with, what you didn't agree with, and what takeaways you're taking from the article. Okay, so these are just some of the questions or some of the things that you can do when you're note taking. So that might include how the source supports your claim or answers your research question for your research paper, the things that you agree with in the source or disagree with and why. what you do and you don't understand. It's also important to be aware of things that you're very familiar with in the source and things that you might need to do more research on. And then, of course, if you're trying to find more sources, try to look at what's being cited. You might find more sources that way. And usually when you're doing research in a certain topic, you pull from a certain body of scholars. And then the last thing we want to leave you off with is, if you've ever heard of an annotated bibliography, you should definitely use it, especially if you're using more than 10 sources or even like 8 sources. It just helps you to keep track of the sources you're using and how each of those sources fit. So when you're doing an annotated bibliography, it's great for you to just not put just a summary of the source, but also include what the main points of the source were, the method that they used to either support the claims you're trying to prove, or how did they gather information in answering a question that they might have had. This could include, like, did they collect data? Were they just collecting different sources to prove a point? Did they do an experiment? That kind of thing. And then the last thing that you want to record in your annotated bibliography is the conclusion of the source. What did they find? So as you can see on this annotated bib, the first source is cited in APA, which is usually the citation style that's used in a lot of our classes. And at the bottom, we have MLA style. So these are just examples and that you can follow for annotated bibs. So do you guys have any questions? For ASA, yes. So you can actually go to our helpful handouts, and I can put the link in the chat box where you can access like how you would cite an ASA. But other than that, thank you so much for your time.
All right, and that just about wraps up our episode number 2, the research process.